and welcome to another narration presented by yours truly, Cryptids Roost. If you enjoy this story, please be so kind as hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe. This will help with the YouTube's algorithm and will help promote the channel more. Even though I'm not yet monetized by YouTube, I have created some awesome merch for you guys. So please be so kind as to visit redbubble.com/people/cryptids-roost and grab yourself a t-shirt, face mask, hoodie, mug or whatever else grabs your fancy. The link is in the description. If you would like an honourable mention, take a snapshot of yourself with your purchase from the merch store and I'll feature it in one of the videos. So grab yourself a coffee, sit back and enjoy the show. I'm a vampire and I investigate the supernatural. I've seen horrors that you people wouldn't believe. This brilliant story is written by Reddit user Head of Spectre. I'm sure you know that the world is full of terrible things. Things that if you were to happen across by chance encounter would kill you with the same ease that you would kill an insect. The fact that humanity is a fairly weak and inconsequential species is a strange but paradoxical fact. On some level we all know it, and yet if the full truth of the matter got out, there would no doubt be mass hysteria. People are afraid enough as it is given the state of the world today, and I don't believe that making them aware of gods and monsters will improve the situation. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Robert Marsh, and as you might have guessed, I've had a bit more exposure to the supernatural than most. I've spent a significant portion of the past 500 years researching it for my own purposes. As for what ignited my interest in the supernatural, that would be vampirism. Long ago, a man I once knew saw fit to curse me with undeath, and since then I have been burdened with eternity, a life without end. It wasn't long after I became a vampire that I decided I might as well make use of my time and learn all I could about my new condition, which led me down the rabbit hole of the supernatural. I've cavorted with fae, gods, spirits and mystics among other things over the years. I learned secrets that could bring civilization itself to its knees, and I suppose all that knowledge was what got the attention of the FRB. I had heard of the International Fae Relations Bureau, known to most as the FRB, prior to their initial approach of me. I thought of very little of them at the time, which should not be interpreted as I thought poorly of them. I simply regarded them as another group of idealists hoping to foster a better relationship between humanity and other non-human entities. While it seemed a noble cause, I'd seen their light rise and fall before, and was ready to dismiss them as nothing more than another group of well-meaning yet doomed fools. That was until I actually met them, at least. The year was 1985, and I was living in Rome, Italy. My life was quiet and more or less peaceful. By day, I worked in sales for a moderately sized company. Not the most exciting career for an entity such as myself, but money is a necessity to survive, and with it I was able to live a modest life in relative comfort. Every few nights I would go to the more expensive bars, and when a woman caught my fancy, I would make her my companion for the evening. Usually we would drink and move between bars before we retired together for the evening. While my nighttime companions were often beautiful, I was never one to overstep boundaries. Sometimes our brief relationships would grow more intimate. Other times we would simply part ways after I'd taken what I needed. An unfortunate side effect of being a vampire is that I needed blood to survive. Many details regarding my kind are simply mythology. Fatal weakness to sunlight, the ability to shapeshift and a fear of silver or crucifixes. However, our thirst for blood is all too real. I've never enjoyed taking a life, and while I could easily drain the blood from a person if I so wished, I can survive on lighter, albeit more frequent meals. My nighttime companions were usually too drunk to remember what I'd taken, and I always took care to ensure their wounds were dressed before I left them. In my long life, I have only had to claim a handful of lives, and I can assure you that most of those were in self-defense. The FRB contacted me on one of my nights out. I had visited a lovely little bar that I like to frequent and ordered my usual glass of red wine as I surveyed the other visitors. Most had come in pairs or groups. I was looking for the loners, much like myself. Someone I could befriend for the evening, male or female, it didn't matter to me. What I spotted was a young woman in a tight black dress sitting by the bar. She was alone and quite lovely to behold. She looked disinterested in the world around her, and the empty glass by her side told me that she was looking to get drunk. I knew her kind. I waved the bartender over and gave him my instructions. "Get her another drink on me," I said, and the bartender nodded before going off to do just that. I watched as he served her the drink, and just as I had expected, she looked over at me. I raised my glass to toast her, and she raised hers in turn before taking a long sip. I took that as an invitation to go over. "Mind if I join you?" I asked. "Not at all, Mr. Marsh," she replied, and I paused. I very rarely gave out the name I was currently living under to strangers, but she seemed to know it instinctively. I caught a wry smile on her lips as she polished off her drink. "You can sit down. I'm here to talk, not to pick a fight," she said. I hesitated for a moment before taking her up on the offer. "All right," I said, "let's talk then. I know you're out to feed tonight, so I won't take up too much of your time," she promised. "I had to make sure I got your attention though, and you do have a type, Mr. Marsh. A single man should be allowed the pleasure of pleasant company if he so chooses," I replied. Of course, I didn't mean to imply otherwise," the woman said. "Here, let me just clear the air. My name is Amanda Spencer. I'm with the International Fey Relations Bureau." My eyebrow quirked slightly. "You're familiar with us?" she asked. "The name has come up before, yes. What exactly do you want with me?" "Word on the street is that you've been around the block, seen a lot, done a lot. It must have taught you a lot too. If you're looking for information, there are more knowledgeable creatures out there, Miss Spencer. I know, we've even gone so far as to employ some of them. The FRB's interest in you is a little more hands-on. Sitting behind a desk doesn't suit you, Mr. Marsh." "And what exactly is that interest?" "Public safety," she replied. "The FRB is young, but we aren't stupid. Not everything out there wants peace, and there's countless things that just don't give a damn. To that end, they've started to put together a little subdivision. Most of our recruits so far are human, and while they've done well enough, the higher-ups are in agreement that we could use someone a little more familiar with these matters." "So what? You're recruiting me into your secret police?" I scoffed. I took another sip of my red wine. "Hardly. The Department of Public Safety is meant to protect people from the things out there that pose a threat. Ghouls, rogue vampires and sirens. Things that could cause some damage if left unchecked. I don't need to tell you that there are more and more incidents every day, and if these things get out, the FRB is toast. I'm recruiting you to protect people." I swirled the wine in my glass thoughtfully. "And it ends at monsters and rogues, correct?" I asked. I looked over at her. "If that's what you're asking, then I'll consider it. But I'm not an assassin, Miss Spencer. I'm not looking for one. I'm looking for a guardian," she replied. There was something in her eyes that made me believe her. Desperation, sincerity, I'm still not sure which. I finished my glass and stood up. "I'll think about it," I said. "That's all I ask," she replied, and set a business card on the table. "When you're ready to start, give me a call." I pocketed the card, and she tipped me one final smile before I left. I'd had no intention of ever calling her, but the words she said lingered in my mind. I can't say I had much faith in the FRB, but if nothing else, I respected their intentions, and I suppose that was enough. I called Spencer at dawn the next day, and I never looked back. My orientation within the FRB did not last long. Technically speaking, I already had centuries of experience in the field, so the biggest thing to adjust to was the new system. It wasn't long before I received my first assignment and was out in the field working for them. The briefing said that there had been an attack on a small cottage just north of Naples. A family had been killed by something that had just come out of the woods, presumably a ghoul, judging by the description of the carnage it had inflicted. Ghouls are particularly nasty creatures, stripped of their humanity by inhuman powers. All that remains of them are pale, malformed husks who only think about their next meal, whatever that may be. They are gruesome creatures who often run afoul of civilization, and the act of killing them is a mercy. I had been instructed to visit a certain restaurant 2 kilometers away from the site of the attack. It was there that I would meet my soon-to-be partner, Gustav Hauser. Gustav was a short and stocky man, although much of his bulk seemed to be muscle. His skin was pale and his eyes were a cold blue. He wore his long brown hair down in a ponytail. I recognised him on sight as he entered the restaurant, and he seemed to pick me out of the modest lunch crowd immediately. The moment he laid eyes on me, he regarded me with an intensity that made me slightly uneasy. I knew disgust when I saw it, but I pretended to ignore it in favour of at least attempting to begin a proper working relationship. "You're the vampire?" he asked as he sat down across from me. "Just call me Marsh," I replied. "Mr. Hauser, I presume?" "Gustav," he corrected. "I assume you've been briefed." "I have. Most likely a ghoul attack. I'd assume you see a lot of these, correct?" Gustav scoffed. "Once a week, more or less. Damn things are everywhere. Never gets easier seeing them. I don't suppose they'd affect you as much given your condition." "On the contrary, I've seen their like for centuries, and they've never failed to disturb me. Immortality doesn't chip away at one's humanity if you don't let it." He let out a huff that could have meant many things. "We'll leave when the sun goes down," he said. "See if we can't draw the ghoul out." "Wouldn't it be more difficult to engage it at night?" I asked. "Yes, but considering your condition..." "I can move perfectly fine in daylight, if that's what you're worried about," I interrupted. "Please, don't worry about my condition. I can assure you that it won't be a hindrance or a threat." "I can assure you it won't, too," he replied. "If you think you're up for it, we could head out after we eat. You do eat, don't you?" "On occasion," I replied. "The lobster looked particularly appetizing if you're a seafood man." Again Gustav huffed, sounding less annoyed this time. He picked up his menu and skimmed through it without another word. Perhaps he might not have liked me right off the bat, but I could work with that. After we ate, we drove to the cottage. It was a quiet little place, well off the beaten path. A prime spot for a ghoul. As we drove up to the old building, I could see the broken glass of the windows and the yellow lines of police tape. Gustav parked just outside the tape and we both got out. We approached the building together and I could smell the old blood inside. "How long ago was the attack?" I asked. "The bodies were discovered 12 hours ago," Gustav replied. "The attack probably happened last night. Someone heard gunshots and came to investigate. Before you ask, I looked into reports of missing pets as well. There were 8 in the past year." "Rather high for a place so remote," I noted. Gustav huffed in agreement. "The cottages are new. Chances are they've backed onto the ghoul's territory," he said, and as he spoke, I scanned the nearby woods. I suspected that Gustav was correct, and if so, our quarry would not be far. I approached the cottage and stepped inside. The stench of stale blood overpowered my senses, although I doubted that Gustav noticed anything. Even without the chalk outlines, I knew exactly where the bodies had fallen. From the looks of it, Ghoul came in the living room window, Gustav said. The mother was found nearby in the kitchen. I'd imagine her screams woke her husband, who got the gun and attacked the ghoul. He was found in the hallway, and their son was killed in his bed, I replied. Gustav paused. I can smell the blood in the sheets from here. They found blood there, but no body. I grimaced at the knowledge of what the ghoul had done. Yet in taking something back to his hideout to feast on, it had marked a trail. I walked over to the broken window and looked out to the forest beyond. It was faint, but I could smell blood in the distance, along with the stink of decay. We'll look for tracks, Gustav said. Might be best to check the area outside that window. No need, I replied. It's close. Gustav paused. I can smell it. Old blood. Human decay. I've been around long enough to recognize it. It's faint, but I think I can track it. Christ, you can smell it? He asked. A benefit of my condition. My senses of smell and hearing are much better than yours, among other things. No shit. I suppose I can see why Spencer wanted your kind on the DPS. If you think you can find that thing, lead the way. He drew a pistol from his holster. Something high caliber, probably good enough to kill a ghoul. He followed me out to the cottage and towards the tree line. While we weren't looking for tracks, I still noticed them in the dirt as we moved into the woods. The smell was getting stronger, and though I trusted my nose, trees around us made me feel claustrophobic. My senses would only lead us to a corpse, not the ghoul itself. The creature could have been anywhere nearby, and so we treaded lightly. The closer we got, the stronger the smell became. There were no doubt several bodies nearby, fresh and rotten meat to feed the insatiable hunger of the ghoul. Up ahead, I spotted a small stone hill. The smell seemed to be coming from here, and as we got closer, I recognized a dip in the ground that led into a small cavern. I held up a hand to stop Gustav. I pointed to the cave. I'll go first, I whispered. Lure it out if it's in there. I trust you're a steady shot. Very, he promised. I've got you covered. Though I had a few reasons to truly trust Gustav, I still silently held him to that word as I began my approach to the cave. In the low light, my eyes could see bones picked clean. Most of them looked animal, but there were a few I recognized as human. The ghoul's lair had a rotten, wet stink to it, bad enough that I covered my mouth as I got closer, and yet as foul as the little hole was, it looked to be completely empty. I grimaced as I spotted the rib cage of what I knew to be the missing child, before taking a step back and looking over at Gustav. I shook my head. The ghoul wasn't there, and yet as I looked at him, I saw his eyes widen. The trees! He called, and raised the gun and fired before I realised just what he'd seen. A heavy weight bore down on me, forcing me to the ground. I heard the snap of hungry jaws by my ear, but they missed me entirely. I kicked and shoved at the creature on top of me and knocked it aside. I saw its spindly greyish limbs struggle for a moment as it regained its footing. It looked at me with wide unblinking eyes, tangled hair falling around its face and dry blood around its mouth. The ghoul hissed at me before clawing its way towards me. I scrambled to my feet, but I wasn't fast enough. Its claws raked at my body and dug into my flesh as it pulled me towards it. Its breath stank of rotting meat. It tried to sink its teeth into my face, but I grabbed it by the skull and held it back as its jaws snapped wildly. I heard another gunshot, and a spray of blood erupted from its neck. The ghoul hissed and tried to look at Gustav before he shot it again, blowing away its head. Still the damn thing stood, although only for a second longer before its bony limbs collapsed from under it. Lifeless, it collapsed to the ground beside me and rolled down into the cave to join the other dead. I looked down at it, panting heavily and thankful I had suffered nothing more than a few scratches. The body of the ghoul twitched as if it was still trying to stand up. Once upon a time, that thing had probably been a lovely young woman. Now it was just another monster. "Can't do everything, can you, vampire?" Gustav asked, his tone cocky. He offered me a hand to help me to my feet. "I suppose not," I replied breathlessly. "Damn good shooting." "I've had some practice. We should move the body, burn it and contact the police." He looked down into the cavern at the body to the child who'd been taken. "I'm sure someone will want to give the child a proper burial." I nodded in response before following Gustav down to collect what was left of the ghoul. While I cannot pretend my relationship with Gustav was ever perfect, I must admit that first job was the start of a solid partnership. He never did seem to warm to my condition, but over the next 4 years it became easier and easier to trust him with my life. Together he and I put down rogue sirens who chose to overfeed or hunt for sport, groups of deep mermaids who'd grown too aggressive, and countless malevolent fae who sought only to spread chaos for fun. Despite our differences, I came to regard Gustav as a trusted friend, and I'd like to believe that he came to think of me in a similar manner. Perhaps that was what made our final job so difficult. On June 12, 1989, 2 hikers in the Ukraine were attacked by an unknown entity, something they described as humanoid. Naturally, the FRB investigated the claims and concluded it was likely a ghoul attack, and within 6 hours of the police report, Gustav and I were asked to investigate. The trail was remote and designed for more advanced hikers. I can't imagine it saw much use. It would have been ideal for a ghoul to call home. As I walked through the heavy underbrush, well ahead of Gustav, I can't say that I anticipated anything other than a standard ghoul encounter. I expected to pick up the scent of decay any time soon, or if we were lucky, perhaps the much fainter wet stink of a ghoul or its lair. I scanned the trees above me, and Gustav had his weapon drawn as we drew nearer to the spot where the attack had supposedly happened. "You smell anything?" Gustav asked. "Just the forest," I replied, and paused. That wasn't entirely true. There's something sweeter in the air here. Not blood, nothing I'm familiar with. "If it's sweet, it's not our ghoul," Gustav said. He paused for a moment before adding, "Assuming it is a ghoul, could have been just a bear." "How many times have we told people it's just a bear?" I asked. He responded with one of his trademark huffs. Maybe this time it really was. "You ever seen a bear with mange, Marsh? Terrifying fucking things. They're bony, their flesh is pale, they look like zombies." "Then the least we could do is confirm it," I said. "If nothing else, the walking is good for you." Again Gustav huffed. "Whatever you say, Mr. Liquid Diet." We hadn't gone much further before the sweet smell I detected grew stronger. It was almost blinding now. In amongst the dark foliage, I could see something small and luminous peeking out. I approached it slowly and bent down to get a closer look. "What is it?" Gustav asked as I examined it. "A flower," I replied, and that was the simplest description of it. The flower was unlike any I'd seen before. It had 5 petals, and its colour seemed to shift from blue to green and even pink. There was a slight glow coming off it, and the smell was strong and sweet. I delicately picked it up before wrapping it in a handkerchief. I could show this to someone back at the office. Maybe they'd know what to make of it. From the corner of my eye, I saw the slight glow from other flowers, identical to the one I found. In the dim light, they were easy to see. "What is this?" Gustav asked warily. "Hell if I know," I replied as I stood up, "but something about this doesn't sit right with me." "It's a flower," he said. "What's there to be worried about?" Humanity fears what it does not understand for good reason, my friend, I replied. This flora doesn't look natural. I consider that very good cause for concern. Gustav responded with another huff. A flower's a flower, vampire. Relax. Quietly, he scanned the area around us before pausing. I heard a rustling of leaves and my partner took off at full speed, gun drawn. Wait, I called, but Gustav was always the sort to leap before he looked. By the time I was up again, I heard gunshots followed by a scream from him. I raced off in the direction Gustav had gone. I heard one final gunshot and a sound, an inhuman squeal that sent a chill through me. That last gunshot had been close. Gustav was just ahead when I found him. He was slumped up against a tree, coughing and hacking. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something dart off into the woods, but my attention was focused more on my partner. Are you all right? I asked. I offered him a hand, but he pushed it aside and climbed unsteadily to his feet. I'm fine, he spat. Fucking thing jumped me. I got it good. It's a goddamn ghoul. Are you hurt? I asked. Bites? Scratches? Scrapes and bruises. I'm fine, mother, he growled before pushing past me to head deeper into the woods. Come on, let's kill that goddamn thing. I would have voiced my protest, but Gustav was a stubborn fool. He would have pressed ahead no matter what I said, and perhaps he was right for that. We had the ghoul on the run. It should have been easy to catch up to now. Still, the deep sound of Gustav's hacking cough did not sit well with me. Up ahead of him, I could see the glow of several more of those strange flowers. The sun is getting low. It might not be wise to be wandering out here so late, I warned. What? Are you scared of the dark? Gustav wheezed. Come on. He broke down into another fit of coughing and gripped a tree to prevent himself from collapsing. You think you're funny, I replied. You can barely stand up and that cough, it doesn't sound right. That fucking ghoul sprayed me with something, Gustav replied. I don't know what, something sweet that stank. I'll be fine, I just need to clear my lungs. I can keep going. I stared at him, watching as he stood up and knowing that I'd need to drag him kicking and screaming out to the woods if I wanted him to leave. I also knew that he'd probably shoot me if I tried. With a resounding sigh, I drew my own pistol and followed him. At the very least, I could ensure my thick-skulled partner didn't get himself killed. I had hoped that we might find the dying ghoul nearby, but we had no such luck. I couldn't even smell any blood from its supposed wounds. While Gustav was adamant he had hit his target, I had my doubts. Our quarry had run far, and I couldn't even hear its rustling movements in the distance. As we walked through the forest, the sky began to darken, but the shimmering hues from the flowers around us lit our path. Gustav cut ahead of me, pausing every few moments to cough. In the forest, it was difficult to mark our path already. With my partner so far ahead, it was next to impossible, even for me. We continued onward, to the point where I wasn't even sure we were on the trail of the creature who had attacked us. The only change in our environment was those glowing flowers that seemed more plentiful than before. They polluted the air with an overpowering sweetness that was enough to make me cough. Gustav! I called. He didn't look back at me. Gustav! It's been almost an hour! We're wasting our time! The ghoul is gone! He just kept going, fueled by a rage that seemed unlike him. I watched him for a moment as he vanished deeper into the woods before I followed, jogging to catch up to him. Gustav! I called as I put a hand on his shoulder. He looked back at me, eyes burning with rage. It's gone! We should turn back! It's here, Gustav replied. It's in the ocean. Don't you feel it? I paused. There was something in his gaze. Something very wrong. He pulled out of my grip. Not much further, he said. Trust me. I watched him go, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt uneasy. Ghouls did not scare me, neither did mermaids, fae, werewolves, or even other vampires. These were all terrible things I knew how to deal with, but Gustav, in that moment, scared me. We continued for over an hour, and it wasn't long before I noticed that the sound of our movement was the only sound I heard. Usually in such pristine forests there would be other sounds of life, but around us the world was silent. No birds, no animals, nothing at all. While I'd known animals to fear ghouls before, this was different. Gustav didn't seem to notice though. I doubted he thought of anything but the prey ahead of him. At some point we started up an incline and I watched him claw at the earth and climb with a single-minded purpose. The strange flowers bloomed thick around us and continued to pollute the air with their sweet stench. "There!" I heard him rasp. "Up there!" It took me a moment to see what he saw. While the darkness did not impair my vision, it would have been easy to miss the overgrown wood that marked the entrance to an old mine. The tunnel into the earth was overgrown by moss, and yet deep inside the cabin I could see the glow of more of those flowers, shimmering like stars. "In there!" Gustav rasped before breaking into another coughing fit. To his credit, it seemed less severe than before. "There! It's in there!" Near the entrance of the mine, I spotted old splintered wood. Someone had boarded it up long ago, and something else had forced its way inside. "Let's go," Gustav said before shambling off into the darkness. I stopped him. "Are you insane? You'll be blind in there." "You're coming with me, aren't you?" he asked. Now it's my turn to huff in response. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted an old lantern sitting abandoned just inside the mine. It didn't take me long to light a little flame inside it. It was rusted, bent, and a little broken, but it sufficed. "Of all the fucking vampires I could get, I get the Gustav murmured. "I'm doing this for your benefit, not mine," I replied. He didn't reply and just turned to trudge off into the mine. I followed him, keeping the lantern aloft. My every instinct told me that going further was a mistake, but my partner had made up his mind long ago. The stink of those radiant flowers was almost blinding. Even if the ghoul had made its home in that old mine, I doubt I would have smelled it. Yet, despite my caution, Gustav continued to press on ahead. I noticed a few rotten old supports that looked like they wouldn't hold well. I'd seen them by the entrance of the mine too. The place looked as if it was ready to collapse any day now. "How do you know exactly where this thing is?" I asked. "I just know," he replied. "I feel it. First I was just following the trail, but now I feel it, Marsh. It's hard to explain." My brow furrowed as I followed him. "That doesn't worry you?" I asked, and again he didn't reply. All the same, I found myself falling back a few steps, distancing myself from my partner. Up ahead I heard movement. Bony limbs shuffling against rock. While I couldn't smell the ghoul, I knew that Gustav's senses had led him to the right place. The luminous flowers around us shimmered in their strange hues. My pace slowed a little bit as I looked forward at Gustav. He kept his gun at the ready, expecting the ghoul to jump out at any moment. From the corner of my eye, I caught movement and heard the sound of a claw against stone. I spun around just in time to see a shape retreat into a side branch of the cavern, and I reached for my gun. "There!" I called, and I didn't wait around for Gustav to come. Instinct took over as I pursued the ghoul and thoughtlessly abandoned my partner. Ahead, I could clearly see the ghoul scuttling like an insect along the wall, yet there seemed to be something wrong with it. The shimmering flowers that accompanied us all the way up to the cavern seemed to be growing out of the ghoul's skin. Its flesh itself seemed to shift against his bones, and when it turned back to hiss at me, seemed to grin knowingly. I could hear Gustav's footsteps rushing up behind me as the ghoul turned to fight. I fired my gun twice. The first shot blew away a chunk of its skull, and the second went into its shoulder. Neither of them slowed it down. Instead, the ghoul rushed towards me on all fours without stopping. I saw its mouth opening, but not in the way it should have opened. Its lower jaw split apart, and much of its neck opened up as well, revealing teeth that should not have been there, but even worse, pale yellow eyes. I fired again, shooting into its terrible maw as it advanced on me, but the bullets did nothing. In my desperation, I hurled the lantern at it. The lighter fluid I'd used to ignite it caught on the flesh of the thing before me, and its body was set ablaze like dry tinder. It shrank back with a pained screech as its flesh sizzled and pulled back from the flames like something alive. I stumbled backwards, watching as the creature burned and shambled backwards. Perhaps the flames themselves wouldn't have been enough to kill it, but in its panic, it clumsily stumbled into the walls lined with flowers. The stray flames set those alight too, and all too quickly the fire spread. I looked back and saw Gustav standing behind me, staring wide-eyed and helpless at the ghoul he'd so desperately pursued. I didn't give him much time to watch. I ran for him and grabbed him by the arm before pulling him back the way we came. We hadn't come too far into the cavern. It was easy enough to find our way back out, and I tugged him along behind me as the old mine very quickly became an inferno. As we reached its mouth, we stumbled out into the moonlight, and I looked back to see a hellish glow in our wake. Gustav stared back at it in turn, panting heavily before looking at me. That ghoul, he finally said. What the hell was that? It was a ghoul, right? Maybe once, I replied. I looked back at the flowers that surrounded us, and I felt my heart race in a way that it hadn't in centuries. These flowers, they did something to it, corrupted it somehow. We need to call this in, quarantine the area, torch and burn everything, get rid of all of them. Wait, get rid of it? Gustav asked. Marsh, what the hell are you talking about? Didn't you see what I saw? That ghoul had those flowers growing out of it, and it was warped. It was something else entirely. It shrugged off our bullets. What if more creatures got exposed to these flowers? Hell, we've been exposed. What might it do to us? Gustav just laughed, his lips curling into a smile. It didn't fit well on his face. I think you're overthinking this, my friend, he said. That ghoul, it was beautiful, don't you think? I mean, look at these flowers. They've turned something so disgusting, so horrible as a ghoul, into something new, something fierce and beautiful. It gave an entirely new life. Now you're talking about burning this all to the ground, without even knowing how far it can go. I stared at him, my eyes narrowing. Do you hear yourself right now? I asked. Think about this for a moment. I am thinking, he replied. For the first time in 20 years, I feel like I'm thinking clearly. Marsh, I knew where this thing was. I think when it attacked me, it breathed some of its essence onto me, and it enhanced me. He paused and looked back into the inferno. No, it shared something with me. With us. I think I got it now. It didn't want food. It wanted to share something, to show us an ocean of possibility. That's why it led us on. It wanted us to chase it so we would see. And now I see, Robert. An ocean of possibility. You should too. I stared at him, watching as his breathing grew heavier. I still clutched my gun in my hand. I'm burning this to the ground, Gustav, I replied. And once you get your head right, you'll agree with me that this was the right thing to... In an instant, Gustav was on top of me. With strength that surpassed my own, he ripped the gun from my hands and forced me to the ground. No, I won't let you do that. I'll make you see, he said, grinning wide from ear to ear. I'll make you see. It's just like I see it. I'll make you see it. Come, Robert, come into the ocean. Breathe in deep. Gustav's smile only grew wider and wider, and I saw his head begin to change. His skull began to split open, and that sweet stink only grew stronger. I could only stare in silent horror as I realised that there was no saving my partner. Whatever the ghoul had done to him, it had corrupted him outright. It had changed him, and now I was seeing just how much of him had been changed. In just a few hours, Gustav was no longer human, and as he prepared to unleash his payload on me, I struggled to push him off of me. I grabbed the sides of his head and forced it upwards. Thick shimmering spores drifted from his open skull with a scream of exertion. I threw him off of me. Gustav fell towards the mine, leaving a trail of spores in his wake. Behind him, the flames were growing closer. The mine was burning up. He climbed onto all fours, spores leaking from his skull. I watched the bone jut out of his arm like a blade, and shimmering flowers grew from the wound. "If you'll not join me in life, I shall have your corpse," Gustav said as his voice distorted and garbled. Like an animal, my former companion raced towards me, but I was ready for him. As he lunged for me, I ducked under him and moved towards the mine. Arrogant as ever, Gustav pursued me, still moving like a twisted animal. His skull had reformed, and his lips were curled back in a twisted smile that I'll never quite forget. As I backed towards the inferno, I spotted one of the rotting supports nearby and focused back on the thing that was once Gustav. He stood up, raising the extended bone shard jutting out of his arm to try and impale me. I sidestepped him and used his own momentum to push him deeper into the mine. The flames licked at his back, and I saw a moment of panic in his eyes. "Marsh, wait!" he called in a voice I knew I recognised, but it wasn't going to stop me. With all my strength, I broke through the support. The rock above us shifted, and I watched as Gustav made a desperate scramble for the entrance, but I was faster. When the mine came down, I was out, but he was not. The last I heard was a desperate scream before the collapse of them crushed him and fully sent him into a peaceful rest. The DPS was quick to quarantine the area and burn the flowers, as per my request. Whatever was out there, it was too dangerous to leave unchecked, of that I was sure. However, Gustav's loss did not sit well with me. I knew that in his final moments he was not himself, and perhaps that bothered me even more than his loss. Either way, I did what I had to do. The flowers needed to be destroyed. I only hoped that we got all of them. If we didn't, well, I'd rather not think about that. Wow, that was an awesome story. If you enjoyed listening to this narrative, be sure to pop over to the author's Reddit profile, Head of Spectre, and drop them a line, or even give them a glowing review. The link to their Reddit profile will be below in the description. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed my narration, then please feel free to like and share the video, leave a comment below, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button and tap that notification bell and then select all. That way you'll receive all notifications each time I upload a new video. Now, even though I'm not yet monetized by YouTube, I have created some awesome merch for you guys. So please be so kind as to visit redbubble.com/people/cryptids-roost. Go grab yourself a t-shirt, face mask, mug, hoodie, or whatever else grabs your fancy. The link is in the description. And if you would like an honourable mention, send in a snapshot of yourself with your purchase from the merch store, and I'll feature it in one of my videos. Now, have you written a creepypasta story you'd like me to narrate? Have you had any cryptid sightings, paranormal or supernatural encounters, or even had a creepy or terrifying situation you would like to share? You can submit your stories and encounters to cryptidsroost@gmail.com, and if you wish to remain anonymous, that's fine with me. Now, I also have a Facebook group, Twitter, Reddit, and I'm also on Discord. And if you would like to support this channel and help make it grow, my PayPal is paypal.me/cryptidsroost. Again, that'll also be below. And don't forget, where fear is, happiness is not.